This morning, we want to carry our series on God and science. So this is the final part of our series, and I'm interested in how much we believe in the existence of God. When I was, lecturing at Bible college, I would do a little sort of survey. I'd ask the students to rate how much they believed in God between 1 and 10. So I'm going to ask you just to do that in your own mind for now. How much do you believe in the existence of God? Give yourself a 1 if you don't at all. So hopefully you're here because you're greater than a 1. And a 10 would mean you have absolutely no doubts ever about the existence of God. All right? And, 5, middle of the road. So just give yourself a number. Be truthful, okay, in your mind. If you've got a number, you can just give yourself. Now, ask the person next to you, what number did they give themselves? Okay, ask. Say, someone next to you, ask them, what number did they give themselves? All right. This morning, as part of what we do, I'd love to see you all move to a 10 plus, okay? Big aim, but that's what I'd love to see happen this morning. Now, I realize that we're saved by faith, and that's true. Hebrews talks about faith as the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not yet seen. So, evidence of things not seen. So, yeah, definitely we're saved by faith and we experience God, and that's how I was saved. But I think it's helpful to know that Christianity is evidence-based and that there's objective support for Christianity, that it lines up with the facts of our existence. So that's what we want to look at this morning. It's good to know that our faith is rational. We're going to look this morning at evidence from the world's design. We're going to look at evidence from the world's existence, and finally, evidence from history. So first of all, let's look at the world's design. Now, I've got to remember to move the PowerPoints on, so you can remind me if I forget. Where did the world's design come from? Well, first I want to start by telling you about this watch. Now, this is a very special watch. It's a very unusual watch. You will have never seen a watch like this watch, because this watch wasn't made by human hand. This came about as the result of an explosion in a watchmaking factory. And there was this huge explosion, and all the bits were flying around in the air, and the back of this watch fell on a table, then bits of glue fell, and then the hands, it's like an analog watch, the hands fell equally spaced, the little lines fell equally spaced around the face of the clock. The 12 fell at the top, the 6 fell at the bottom, then an hour hand fell, then a minute's hand fell, then a second's hand fell, then a battery fell, and they're all glued right in place, and then it started ticking, and the second's hand went round in exactly 1 minute, the minute hand exactly in an hour, and then the hour hand in 24 hours. And it keeps perfect time. And then the straps were added on. Amazing. Do you believe me? Anyone believe me? No one believes me. Why not? Well, the watch is super complicated. It seems complex, doesn't it? And obviously it must have been designed and built. Think about our world. Think about our universe. Far more complicated than this watch, and yet so precisely engineered. We're going to have a look at a couple of the things about our universe. Consider the cycles, like we have the water cycle, the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle. Take the water cycle, the water evaporates from the oceans and then it falls as rain and runs down the hills, and we use it and it goes back into the ocean, evaporates again, and round. And you've got all these perfectly working cycles, pretty much as my watch. You've also got some precisely engineered variables For instance, we are 93 million miles away from the sun. If we were 92 million miles away, no human life would be possible. We'd all burn up. Or if we're 94 million miles away, no human life would be possible because everything would be frozen. But we are exactly right, 93 million miles. Now, what about the salt percentage of the oceans? Oceans are 3.4% salt, which happens to correspond to the human body. We're also 3.4%. Now, if the oceans were 4% salt, no life would be possible on Earth. If there were 2% salt, no life would be possible. Precisely engineered to permit life. Consider the oxygen in the atmosphere. Oxygen is 21% of the atmosphere. Most of the atmosphere is nitrogen, but it's 21%. If the oxygen level was 23%, there'd be no life. If it was 19%, no life would be possible. And there are so many, hundreds of these variables which were precisely engineered to enable life on our planet. The Herald, I remember reading an article in the Herald a number of years back, and it said, this is just quoting from it, Earth is one lucky rock. Whether you believe it's by chance or by divine design, the truth is that as far as we know, our planet is uniquely positioned for life through a combination of lucky coincidences. And it goes on to say, it's a precarious balance, a precious and a rare one, making our Earth as about lucky as a rock as you can get in our known universe. Now, design proves the existence of a designer. Isn't that a reasonable statement? Like if we have a building, take this building, we know that there must have been a builder because we have a building. Take my car. I know that there was a car manufacturer because I have a car. If there's a computer, you know there's Apple somewhere lurking in the background, okay, or Microsoft. We know that anything we have has been built by a builder. Could we have an intelligent order without a mind, or an orderly creation without a creator? I like what Albert Einstein said. He said, the mathematical precision of the universe reveals the mathematical mind of God. The argument from design and purpose indicates the existence of an infinite intelligent being greater than the universe. Like you look at our world, just so precisely engineered, the Earth spins on its axis roughly every 24 hours, giving us day and night. It circles the sun, taking 364 and a quarter days, giving us a year. It's tilted on its axis, maybe 24 degrees, giving us 4 seasons. And everything is precisely engineered to permit life. I like what Stephen Ball, a highly educated physicist, says. To deny any involvement of a creator has become increasingly difficult to do while maintaining intellectual honesty. The evidence for precise design built into the universe at every level have become staggering. And it's true. As science progresses, it sees this precise design. For instance, consider your body. It all came from a single cell. And in that cell was some DNA. And that little wee microscopic cell that you can't even see, which has the DNA, it was all the information and the structure for how to build your body. It was all in just that one little cell and the small DNA part of that cell. And it decided that you're going to have 2 feet, 2 arms, 2 legs, everything else, brain, your organs, your eyes, your ears, everything in that tiny little cell, the information. In fact, they say if you've got the DNA, the information and the DNA on a pinhead, and you wrote that into books, those books would stack up so high that they would reach the moon 500 times over. And that's just the DNA on a pinhead. That's the amount of information that is stored. And it's amazing. I like Psalm 19, verse 1. Now, I've got a quote of the psalm here, but I actually have memorized it from another version, so that's the one I will use. But it's amazing, you know, I often in summer go out on our deck at the back at night time before going to bed, and I might just look up into the heavens and I see the stars and everything, and I just feel like quoting this psalm. You know, the heavens declare the glory of God. You just see the glory. And the earth is handiwork. Day after day pours forth knowledge. You know, we have this knowledge as you see everything every day, and as scientific knowledge builds up, day after day pours forth knowledge. Night after night speech. There's no line or language where their voice isn't heard. Their words go out into the end of the world. And you think about those last couple of verses, it's a universal language. It doesn't require translating. You know, what we can see in creation is available to every human being. Every man, woman, and child can look. It doesn't depend on any particular language. You know, it's a universal language. Its words go out to the end of the world and are informing people of the existence of God and of the glory of God, if they care to look. I like what Martin Luther said. He said, creation is God's second book. And it's so true. You know, the Bible is his first book, but you go for a walk out in creation, in nature for a couple of hours, and after a while, don't you just sense the presence of God and the reality of God and you know, in the creation? It's God's second book, and he's speaking to us through his second book. And that's what nature's designed to be. Romans 1 verse 18 speaks a lot about that. Okay, so that's our first argument for the world's, for the existence of God, is the world's design. It reminds me of the story of the surgeon and the architect and the politician. And they were just trying to work out who had the oldest profession, and they were all trying to claim, I've got the oldest profession. And the surgeon spoke up and he said, well, I clearly have the oldest profession, because when Eve was created, God put Adam under anesthetic, and he did an operation, pulled out a rib, and there came Eve. So clearly I've got the oldest profession. But the surgeon said, now hang on a minute. The architect said, now hang on a minute. In the beginning it says, you know, God created everything, and he says the earth was a chaotic waste. And then from Genesis verse 3, he started to bring design and order out of the chaos. Then the politician spoke up and said, but who created the chaos? All right, it may be a bit harsh on politicians. Okay, coming to our next area regarding, you know, the existence of God is the world's existence. Now, not only is the world intricately designed, but it's here. We have something rather than nothing. So where did the world come from? Well, up to 100 years ago, scientists believed that the universe existed continuously and forever. And they called that theory the steady state theory. Then Einstein developed his theory of relativity, and according to his theory, we should have an expanding universe. So other scientists started doing work on that, and they gathered evidence and found out, in fact, that the universe is expanding. And so they came up with the idea of an explosion at the beginning, and they called that the Big Bang theory. You know, that there was an explosion, everything started from a point of time. And so there we just have a little illustration. But for the Big Bang theory to be correct, we would need some kind of heat radiation from the initial explosion. You know, if there's an explosion and you're nearby, it's hot, isn't it? And so if this actually happened, this Big Bang happened, then there should be some heat radiating out. Certainly after a long time, that heat would start cooling down. But it would be like if I dropped a stone in a pool, you would see ripples, wouldn't you? There'd be a first line of ripples, then another line, and the ripples would be getting smaller and smaller, but they'd still be there. So that should be happening in the universe. There should be these ripples of the heat, whatever form the heat took. It could be light or microwave radiation, whatever, but there should be these ripples. But they hadn't discovered ripples. And then in 1965, a couple of scientists from the Bell Lab science group were installing this new telescope, a super powerful telescope. And they weren't thinking of this at all. They were just into astronomy, and they were, while they were installing the telescope, they kept on noticing that they were getting this microwave radiation, this background noise, and it was a bit of a nuisance. So they started to look around, is there any radiation around where we have the telescope, and they eliminated different things, even looking at pigeon poo that may have landed on top and had some radioactive material in it. They eliminated everything, and still the radiation was there. So they started calling around various scientists, and what they discovered is this is the background radiation, the predicted background radiation from the Big Bang. It was low level, hadn't been discovered before, but this was the first telescope capable of analyzing this kind of radiation. And subsequent work has shown that these waves are actually coming in the forms of ripples. Okay, circular ripples from an initial point. You know, the ripples have cooled quite a lot after so much time, and that's where they were never picked up before. But now they're discernible as clearly as ripples rippling from an initial starting point. And I like what Stephen Ball says in relation to this, if I can get this to work. Okay, so actually going back. Okay. The discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation made in 1965 showed us clearly that the universe had a beginning. So this is the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle. If the video of the expanding universe is reversed, what we can find is that everything that we see came from one single point. In fact, from nothing. Okay, does that make sense? Everything that there is, because it's all expanding out in these ripples from this single point, that everything came from nothing. Now, what Einstein and other scientists have shown us is that space, time, and matter can only exist together. You can't have one without the other. You can't have matter without space and time, and you can't have space without matter, space and time also. So what this shows is that there's a beginning point to everything. There wasn't like there was this pre-existing space and there was an explosion of matter which has progressed to fill the space. No, the space couldn't exist apart from the time and the matter. So at the moment of the Big Bang, you have both matter being created, you have space beginning, and you have time beginning. In fact, everything that we know began at this single point. Now, science almost universally now accepts the Big Bang as the way that our universe started. So this causes a problem, doesn't it? Because it shows that everything had a beginning. Everything came out of nothing. Now, that causes a problem for atheists because something coming out of nothing is hard to explain. And so ultimately we're left with only two alternatives. Either we've got to say nothing created something out of nothing, or you've got to say something created something out of nothing. These are the only two options. We need to choose these. You know, science has shown that everything came out of nothing. Everything had a beginning. Space itself a beginning. Time itself a beginning. Matter a beginning. So you've got to make a choice. Which statement are you going to believe? Which statement is the more plausible? To me, and to most people, I think, it would seem the first statement is the kind of statement you'd hear from a child in kindergarten. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Nothing created something out of nothing. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. And so we're left with something created something out of nothing. What is that something that created? Clearly, that is God. And we have, you know, the biblical record to confirm that. Logic demands an external agency. Logic demands a creator. In fact, science demands a creator. Science is so consistent with the need for a creator. It is, you know, the only reasonable explanation. And what do we have in Genesis? Genesis is, the word Genesis means beginnings. And what do we have right at the beginning of the beginning? Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now scientifically verified, all right? And as I say, the vast majority of scientists believe that's how things started. Not necessarily the biblical account, but that they started from nothing, that there was a beginning to space, time, and matter. Isn't that great? I find that so powerful and so supportive of, you know, of Christianity. Yeah. All right. There's an article in Nature I read a number of years ago. Nature is a prestigious scientific journal, and they surveyed a number of scientists as to belief in God. Whereas 100 years ago, very few scientists believed in God. But what they found from their survey of leading American scientists, 40% of the physicists, biologists, and mathematicians now believe in a personal God, a supreme being. You know, there's not this dichotomy between science and Christianity, not contemporary science anyway. They both support one another. Both are pointing in exactly the same direction, which is exactly what you'd expect. The more knowledge we get, if it is true that God created everything, the more knowledge we get, the more it should support that position. So there's not this division. In old science, there was a division. If you go back 80 to 100 years, yes, there was a division between Christianity and science. The scientists believe in the steady state universe that eternally existed and had no beginning. And they also believed, you know, the Darwinian theory was much fresher back then. And Darwin had said, you know, the biggest objection to my theory is the lack of fossil evidence, but that's going to appear in the future, I have no doubt. It never did. But in those early days of Darwinian evolution and this belief in the steady state universe, it looked like Christianity and science were opposed. They were at loggerheads. You know, you couldn't really maintain both. But now with contemporary science, it shows that Christianity is supported by science. It's entirely consistent with science. In fact, what is at loggerheads is atheism and science. Now, you know, atheists used to say, you Christians have to throw away your brains. But now the tables have totally turned, and atheists are having to go beyond science and try and find a philosophical way of explaining things, a faith way of explaining things that goes beyond the evidence of science. So you've got now this discrepancy between atheism and science. That's where the conflict is. The conflict is no longer between Christianity and science. Does that make sense? That's contemporary science. There's no longer this conflict that is so old school, that is basically gone. Well, you're probably wondering, well, why are there still so many atheistic scientists around? Well, I believe one of the reasons is that they've been brought up in that, and they have never taken the time to examine the various divisions of science, never taken the time to examine the evidence, just thought, well, everybody believes, that there is no God, and they've never taken that time, which is exactly the story of one of the greatest scientists of our time, Francis Collins. And we saw a video clip of him a couple of weeks ago. He was a noted atheist. Remember, he led the Human Genome Project, which mapped all of human DNA. And he was brought up an atheist, and he thought, religion was just emotionalism and because of our childhood conditioning. And this is what he says. And I think this would probably have been reflective of a lot of scientists and explain why there is still atheism around. He said, I arrived at an answer. He was an atheist, remember. I arrived at an answer to the most important issue we human beings ever deal with. Is there a God? And I'd arrived there without ever really looking at the evidence. And I was supposed to be a scientist. Because one thing scientists claim to do is to arrive at a conclusion based on evidence. And I hadn't taken the trouble to do that. I believe that's a story of many. And he came to realize that you can come to faith on a rational basis, a reasoned basis. He read C.S. Lewis, ended up giving his heart to Jesus Christ and embracing him. Isn't that good news? I find this so encouraging because I was brought up in that era, when I was younger, where it was just all faith. There was that feeling that science was opposed to Christianity, but I'm just so encouraged. Contemporary science is pointing so clearly to the existence of a creator God. All right, final argument that I want to come to for the existence of God is the historical argument. So we want to look from a historical point of view, not a biblical one, because if we looked from a biblical one, we'd be into circular reasoning. So let's see what historians have to say. If there is a God, it would be likely that he would want to communicate with us, isn't there? Reach out. Why would he create everything? Why would he make us and then just ignore us? And so we understand that he did reach out as Christians in the person of Jesus Christ. So is Jesus Christ historically validated? Yes, he is, overwhelmingly. There would be very few serious historians, including atheists, who would deny the existence of Jesus Christ. We can get a summary of his life and ministry in secular history without referring to the Bible. The Jewish historian Josephus, he was an enemy of Christianity. He didn't want to support it in any way. And he writes in his works about Jesus, and obviously there were miracles happening, and this is the way he explained it. He said Jesus was a sorcerer who went around doing magic. Okay, there we have an attestation to the miracles, the ministry of Jesus. In Roman history, you have one of the Roman governors writing to Caesar himself, and the letter's been preserved to Pliny the Younger. And he's saying, what do we do with these Christians? They follow this guy he called him Christus, meaning Christ. They follow this Christus, and we had him crucified under Pontius Pilate. And he goes on and he says, and they believe that he was raised from the dead. And so we get a lot of information about Jesus Christ and his life and ministry from independent history. Okay. Not only that, we know the impact of Jesus on the Western world. Well, in fact, on the whole world. Every page of every newspaper says at the top, how long since he was born. He split history in two, before Christ in AD and O Domini, meaning in the year of our Lord. Split it right in two. The whole Western world celebrates his birthday at Christmas. We celebrate his death at Easter. We have a 7-day week. We worship on a Sunday. It's all coming from the involvement of Jesus Christ and God in human affairs, historically provable. So, not only that, you have Christianity itself and its redeeming work in humanity in all the nations of the earth. And that becomes an enigma without the existence of God. Take someone like John Newton, just for one. He was a slave trader, buying and selling human flesh, seeing many killed because of the conditions in which they transported them. He got saved and born again by Jesus Christ, gave his life to Christ, and wrote that wonderful song that we still sing, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. He knew what he was, but saved by grace. And sitting in this room are many testimonies to the redeeming work of Jesus Christ in human lives. So, in fact, his impact is so pervasive that 30 to 40% of the world's population claim to follow Jesus Christ. 30 to 40%. His impact that I've just described is the kind of impact that you would expect if he was the Son of God, right? That's what we would expect, and that's what's happened. But someone may say, well, there's not only Jesus who's had a big impact, you've got guys like Muhammad who have had a big impact and lead many. Yes, but you think about Muhammad, there's some significant differences. Number one, he never claimed to be the Son of God or God. Number two, his conversions were at the point of the sword. Okay, if you read your history, 7th century history, you'll find after Islam was founded, they must have been very good militarily because they swept through at the point of a sword through northern Africa, Middle East, and they went right through to Spain, where they were finally stopped in Spain. It was all military conquest. They held the pagans to the point of the sword and said either you convert to Islam or you die. With the Christians and the Jews, they said, because you believe in one God, monotheist, we'll just tax you heavily. So they taxed them. And eventually, all other religions were wiped out of their lands. But it was all at the point of a sword. Whereas Jesus was different. He said, if someone slaps you on the one right cheek, turn to him the left. If he takes your shirt, give him your coat as well. He preached a gospel of love. To follow Jesus is to respond because of love, not because of the point of a sword. In fact, I like this famous saying, about Jesus. He was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another obscure village where he worked in a carpenter's shop until he was 30. Then for 3 years he was an itinerant preacher. He never had a family or owned a home. He never set foot inside a big city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born. He never wrote a book or held an office. He did none of the things that usually accompany greatness. While he was still a young man, the tide of popular opinion turned against him. His friends deserted him. He was turned over to his enemies and went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between two thieves. While he was dying, his executioners gambled for the only piece of property he had, his coat. When he was dead, he was taken down and laid in a borrowed grave. 20 centuries have come and gone, and today he is the central figure for much of the human race. All the armies that ever marched, and all the navies that ever sailed, and all the parliaments that ever sat, and all the kings that ever reigned, put together, have not affected the life of man upon earth as powerfully as this one solitary life. Amazing, isn't it? And so true. And exactly what you would expect if he was the Son of God. So the life of Jesus is a powerful argument for the existence of God. In fact, it's hard to explain away the life of Jesus and the redeeming work of Christianity apart from the existence of God. How are you going to explain it? So that is another argument. So just coming towards a conclusion now, I would just like to recap at what we've looked at. One, we've looked at the incredible design of the earth. You know, those finely engineered items and cycles that permit life on our planet, that don't permit life elsewhere. And we looked at my watch, and no one would believe that, you know, this was created by time and chance. And yet we have the super watch that is our Earth and universe, which is much more complex than this. And so if we can't believe this is created by time and chance, we certainly couldn't believe that that is either by extension. We've seen that the Big Bang Theory is more or less universally accepted by science, and it shows that there was a beginning point to everything we know, to everything we see. Space itself, time itself had a beginning. Science attests to that. And reason indicates that there must be a God. There has to be a God. There's no other explanation. I know some atheists have tried to get very fanciful and use far-fetched explanations that try and exclude God, but it's clutching at straws. There must be, something must have created something out of nothing. Lastly, we've seen the person of Jesus Christ and his claim to be God. God came in a human body that we may comprehend him. He did want to communicate with us, just as you would expect. And we're seen his historicity and his undeniable impact on humanity. Now, when you look at what we looked at a couple of weeks ago, and that was, we looked at the fossil evidence of the earth and its support of creation and the lack of fossil evidence to support macroevolution. You know, there's an overwhelming case for the existence of God. Jesus said that he was the way, the truth, and the life. And perhaps the band might like to come. And that no one could come to the Father but by him. You know, the Bible says the reason for his birth was his death. And God so loves us. So